My mother slept with my fiancé on my wedding day, and my father made $2 million from it. That's the sentence I keep at the front of a story, not because I enjoy saying it, but because everything that follows is just light and shadow around that truth. If you need the scene, it looked like this: a summer Saturday in the Midwest, the kind of sky that makes the cornfields shine like coins, and a venue people book a year in advance. Stone patios, a timbered hall dressed with chandeliers, lavender blowing in from the ridge. The program called it Barn Elegance. My mother, Vivian, loved that phrase and repeated it like a charm when the caterer fretted about rain. Barn Elegance, darling. We can survive a cloud. Vivian is the wealth in our family. Old Chicago money, diluted through philanthropy and apartments with too many windows. My father, Tom, is hardware store practical. Calloused hands, a ledger book, the kind of man who can fix a gate with baling wire and patience. They look mismatched in photographs. People say opposites attract. They don't mention what happens 25 years later when the magnetism quiets and the math doesn't. I should tell you about Carter, the man I meant to marry. He had a handshake that charmed grandparents, and a grin that made waiters remember his face. He could talk about yield curves with my mother's friends and about football with my dad's fishing buddies. When he asked me to marry him in December on the courthouse steps, he said it like a promise he'd thought about for months. I believed him. I believed that if two people wanted the same life, wanting could be a bridge, sturdy enough to carry them across. Our wedding was the compromise you make when two families measure value differently. My mother booked the top venue in the state and brought in a florist whose peonies had their own fan club. My father planted himself at the back of house meetings and talked to the staff like they were the only reason a day like ours works. Somewhere between those two energies, I stood in lace and planned to say the words that build a house. I do. I will, I mean it. The morning slid by in a sweet blur. Hairpins, toast with orange juice, my mother fastening a bracelet around my wrist with the care of a woman threading a needle. She kissed my cheek and called me her miracle. My dad practiced our dance under his breath and told the photographer, no filters. She's fine as she is. Carter texted me a picture of the groomsmen trying to tie bow ties and added, pray for us. It felt like a good joke from a good man. We said vows under a wood arch dressed in greens. The officiant made room for words about kindness and keeping promises when the porch light is the only light left. My mother cried. My father wiped his eyes and pretended it was dust. Carter squeezed my hands when I said honor, and I squeezed back when he said always. We signed the license with a pen the planner had warmed in her palm, so the ink would flow. When we turned to face our families, the room rose and the sound that met us was the best kind of thunder. Dinner was a Midwestern poem: roast chicken with herbs, sweet corn sautéed with peppers, rolls you needed two hands for. My mother turned the room like a hostess born for galas. My father checked on an older neighbor who couldn't eat gluten and found her a plate that wouldn't make her sick. A kid from my first grade class, now taller than me, handed me a drawing of a bride and groom holding balloons. Carter kissed my temple and said, I'm the luckiest. I felt like I might be too. Then a small thing happened that didn't feel small at all. Halfway through the salad course, a waiter hustled to our table to speak to the planner, who bent her head to listen, then lifted it with a sweet practiced smile and said into the mic, we have a tiny mystery. A guest has misplaced a watch. If anyone picked up a timepiece at the bar, find me. People chuckled. Someone called, finders keepers, the way uncles do when they think their voice is part of the entertainment. The planner slipped away toward the service corridor with the watch's owner and, to my surprise, Carter. He leaned down. Back in a sec, gonna help them check cameras. It's probably wedged behind a rail. It was such a helpful thing. A good guy errand. It didn't occur to me to say no. I watched him go with the planner and the guest, the three of them disappearing around the corner toward the kitchen and the tiny office where the venue hides its screens and keys. My mother touched my shoulder. A watch, she murmured, eyes dancing, on a wedding day. The symbolism is too on the nose. I laughed because that's what daughters do when mothers make a joke. My dad was deep in story with a neighbor about a walleye tournament on Lake of the Woods. The band slid into a standard my grandparents had loved, and the dance floor filled. Time is a theater trick. 10 minutes can feel like 2. 2 can feel like an hour if the person you love is in a room you cannot see. Carter returned, cheeks a little flushed, hair a little mussed, and kissed me more publicly than he normally would. "False alarm," he said. "They'll keep looking." He reached for his wine. I put my hand on his sleeve and found it already moving away. If there was a draft, it wasn't from the air conditioning. When the toast began, Tessa, my maid of honor since 5th grade, told a story about the day I taught her to drive stick in my dad's pickup, and we stalled on a hill while a line of cars made a chorus behind us. "She doesn't rattle," Tessa told the room. "She just sets her jaw and tries again." People laughed, and some looked at me like they knew that about me already. Carter's best man talked about our first Christmas, how Carter had burned cookies and bought more so I wouldn't see the failed ones cooling like hockey pucks on the counter. Carter laughed too loudly, then clinked his glass against mine as if to knock away a thought that kept returning. "If you want the moment the world tilted, you can draw the line here," a waiter whispered to the planner. The planner whispered to my father. My father rose with a face that made the room remember what silence is, and the band, God bless them, forgot their place in the chart and stopped mid-bar. "Everything okay?" someone said near me, too brightly. My father didn't run. He walked. A steady, purposeful march through tables and chairs, through bouquets and bows, toward the side of the hall where the kitchen breathes and the so-called barn becomes a building again. The doors swung and swallowed him. The room lifted and leaned as if it might follow. He was gone 3 minutes. 4. In memory it is both one endless minute and a lifetime. When he returned, he was holding a ring of keys, and his voice carried the way a storm front carries across the plains. "Stop," he said to the band that was already stopped. "Everyone stop." If you've grown up in the Midwest, you know the tone a father uses when a hand reaches for a hot stove. It's saving and scolding at once. It turned 200 heads as one. My mother stood from the far table, a smile ready to rescue any moment into the light. My father looked at her and then at me and then at Carter. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. "I found them," he said. "In the pantry." The room didn't breathe. "My wife," he added, meeting my mother's eyes. "And your groom. People say the blood drains. Mine didn't. It seemed to boil and freeze in the same second, leaving me strangely capable of noticing details. A peony petal stuck to the heel of a bridesmaid's shoe. The way a single candle guttered if anyone spoke, the bend in the cake knife where someone had pressed too hard. My mother's hand flew to her throat, a gesture she had perfected at charity lunches. Carter's hand went to his pocket as if pockets could hide a person. And there you have the middle of the story, the part where the beautiful day broke like thin ice under heavy boots. You might think that was the end, but it wasn't. It was just the first door. The second, the one about money, about contracts, about the kind of plan that uses a daughter's wedding like a hinge, didn't open until much later. I didn't know that yet. I only knew the house I had been building in my head no longer had a roof. Tessa put a hand at the small of my back. "Don't move unless you want to," she whispered. I didn't. I couldn't. I let the whole room move around me instead. The planner hustled toward the kitchen. An aunt guided the band into a gentle instrumental as if music could paper over the shape of a blow. My father's jaw clenched the way it does when a lug nut refuses the wrench. My mother's face became a mask, and I could not tell which part of it was grief and which was theater. Carter looked at me like we could still tell the story differently if we hurried. We couldn't. We never could. And somewhere 2 floors away, a lock was still warm from a key I had never seen before. I don't remember sitting down, but I must have, because someone set water in front of me and it left a round, sweating mark on the linen. Tessa crouched, so her eyes were level with mine, which is what you do for children and for people who have been blindsided. "Breathe with me," she said, and we did 4 in, 4 hold, 6 out, the kind of math that quiets a heart. Across the room, my father spoke with the planner in low tones that made her nod in professional sympathy, then hurried toward the kitchen with a security guard who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. My mother didn't rush to me. She looked toward the women's lounge, moved 3 steps, then stopped and went still like a deer deciding which direction holds the field. Carter took half a stride in my direction, and then found himself hemmed in by 3 groomsmen who were either brave or foolish enough to think they could manage the physics of a consequence. "Give her space," one said. I didn't know whether to love him or resent him for thinking I needed permission to have air. The band, to their eternal credit, did not try to switch to a bouncy number. They found a steady, neutral song and played it under the murmur like a rug. People did what Midwestern people do in the face of disaster. They cleared plates, fetched coffee, offered napkins, and spoke in practical questions. Do you need a ride? Should we call Aunt Meg? Is there somewhere quiet? A neighbor I'd once helped shovel a driveway pressed a wrapped butterscotch candy into my hand as if sugar could hold a woman together. In the Midwest, it sometimes can. What do you want to do? Tessa asked. I don't know, I said, which was the truest thing in the room. I don't know what's real. Reality arrives in pieces. The first piece was a sentence from my father when he returned from the kitchen. Let's step outside. He didn't touch me. He stood beside me until I stood too, and then he walked with me to the patio where the night air had cooled and the string lights made the lavender look like tiny planets hovering over the fields. Tell me what you saw, I said, and hated how formal it sounded. I'm a teacher. It was the question I used for a child caught with a hand in the jar. My father gave me facts the way men like him have always given facts. Straight lines, no adjectives. Pantry. Door not quite closed. 2 people in a position no one could confuse with a hug. Staff members sent to fetch the manager. He paused, as if choosing a word he could live with. Compromising. Mom, I said, and the word felt like a pebble I couldn't spit out. And Carter. He nodded once. I locked the door and brought the key. You locked it? I asked, and he blinked like he hadn't realized he'd said that part out loud. So they're in there? They were, he said. By now the manager has them in an office, I expect. She said she would separate them and call their people. He met my mother's sister and Carter's best man. He meant we were not, despite appearances, animals. He meant we were going to do this with a kind of decency that doesn't feel like decency while it's happening. I pressed my palms to the stone rail and felt its honest cold. Inside, someone tried to clap the room into bravery and failed. What do you need from me? My father said, and the sentence was so strange, like a lifeguard asking a drowning swimmer how he could help, that I almost laughed. I need you to tell me this isn't real, I said. He didn't. He put a hand on the rail beside mine. I can tell you I love you, he said. I can tell you you're not alone. I can tell you we will leave when you say leave. Do you want me to leave? I asked, because part of me needed to see whether this was about me or about the version of me that made it easier for him to breathe. I want you to be safe, he said, which is what men say when they're not going to answer your real question. Behind us, the glass doors opened and closed like a heartbeat as people moved in and out with news and guesses. Tessa appeared with my flats. I slipped off the heels because balance seemed non-negotiable. The planner joined us, hands folded as if in prayer, eyes doing the delicate work of measuring a room without looking like she was measuring. We've placed Mrs. Whitaker in a private office, she said, choosing my mother's married name like it could anchor something. Mr. Morgan is with his party. I'm so very sorry. She had said those words before. I could hear it, though probably not on a night like this. What do you need from us? She asked. It is the sentence of every service worker, every nurse, every teacher in a crisis. I almost loved her for asking it like I could still choose. I need to speak, I heard myself say, and I didn't know I decided that until the sentence stood in the air like something you could hang your coat on. The planner nodded. We'll quiet the room, she said. Take your time. We'll be ready when you are. Tessa squeezed my hand. Are you sure? She whispered. No, I said, but it feels like the only way through is straight. We returned to the hall together, Tessa on one side, my father a step behind, the planner ahead of us, shepherding the crowd into a hush you only get when 100 people want to help and don't know how. The band let the last chord fade, and the MC lifted the mic with the gravity of a man who knows the air is thinner now. Our bride would like a word, he said, and even my bones knew this wasn't the sentence he expected to say tonight. I didn't make a speech, I made a door. This is not the story you came for, I began, but it is the truth we have. I didn't name names because names were already burning in every head. I named only actions, and I named my boundary. The celebration ends here for me, I said. You are welcome to stay and eat and dance. I hope you do. But I am not going to cut cake and pretend to be the kind of woman who smiles while a lie walks her home. Someone started to clap and then stopped, unsure whether applause belongs to grief. My father's shoulders, behind me, lowered a half inch like a man set down a box. My mother's sister hurried forward with a coat I didn't need, the way women fix what they can reach. Carter's best man stared at the floor as if it might open and make this easier. Carter stood 3 tables away. I didn't look at him long enough to count his freckles. I gave him the mercy of a short gaze. He opened his mouth, a man amounting a sentence, and I shook my head once. Not here. Not me. Not now. I left the ring on the table like a coin for a ferryman and walked out through the doors that led to the lawn, where the air didn't care what was happening inside. The sky had started to purple at the edges. Fireflies made their ordinary magic along the fence. I could hear, faintly, my mother in a room somewhere insisting on explanations, and Carter somewhere else insisting on accidents. The words didn't matter. They were water over stone. On the patio, my aunt pressed a Tupperware of rolls into my mother's sister's hands, muscle memory from every potluck disaster we've ever outlived. A cousin offered me a sweatshirt with a high school logo. All the emotions in the room were big, but the gestures were small and specific in kind. It felt like church without the liturgy. "Where will you go?" Tessa asked. "Home," I said. And then, because the truth was bigger than my mouth could hold just then, eventually. We made it as far as the gravel before the first car doors opened and closed, before the thoughtful people understood that leaving quietly is sometimes the nicest thing a guest can do. The band played something soft for the few who stayed. The caterers stacked plates in silence. My father stood with the planner and, in a voice meant only for her, said, "Please save copies of everything. We'll need paperwork." I would think about that sentence later. I would turn it over and hear the metal of it. Paperwork! It should have rung like a bell then. Instead, it fell into the pocket of the night and hid there. My phone lit with messages, 3 from unknown numbers already hungry for the story, 1 from a neighbor, "We love you, kiddo," and 1 from my mother, "Please come to me." Let me explain. I didn't answer any of them. I walked to the edge of the lawn and stood where the string lights ran out and the field began. The truth is a fence you can lean on. I leaned. The lavender moved like a crowd remembering a song. If anyone had asked me what I felt, I would have said only present. The future was farther away than usual. The past, stranger than I'd thought. The present fit in my 2 hands like bread. Behind me, the hall had already begun telling its versions. Mine would take longer. It would require a second door, one I didn't know existed yet, one marked with money and signatures, and a plan that had begun long before my mother and Carter closed a pantry door. Morning makes even a ruined place look honest. The venue smelled like coffee and cleanser, the chandeliers were still, the tables stripped bare. Staff moved with the efficient compassion of people who've seen every kind of joy and its opposite. A dish boy with sleepy eyes gathered votives into a bin. The planner, still impeccable, still kind, handed me a slim folder. "Copies of the incident report, the door logs, and the vendor invoices," she said. "I wasn't sure what you'd want, so I made you a packet. There are also notes from guests who asked me to pass their love without intruding. It was the strangest gift I've ever received and exactly right." Tessa drove me out past the edge of town where my parents live on 10 acres with a pond my father dug himself. The gravel shook the car into a hum. We didn't talk until we hit the long straight where the cottonwoods start, and then she said, "I'm proud of you," and I said, "I'm tired." We both cried a little without losing the road. My mother's car was in the drive when we pulled in. I wasn't surprised. She never let a narrative travel without her. She stood on the porch, coatless though the morning had a bite, holding a mug like a prop that could be sipped at the right moments. Her eyes were red. When she saw me, she started forward and then stopped, uncertain how far the distance was. "I want to talk," she said. "I don't," I answered, and it wasn't cruelty. It was safety. "Not until I know which part of you is speaking." "The part that loves you," she said, and I believe that. Love can sit beside terrible decisions like polite strangers at a banquet. "I made a mistake," she added, and the word was too small and too flexible to carry what it needed to carry. She tried again. "I was reckless." "On my wedding day," I said, and heard how flat my voice had become. "With the man I promised." She flinched. "It wasn't planned." "Maybe," I said, "but you were also ready to be found." I could see it in the way she had been all evening, bright, nervous, hovering at the edges of rooms she used to own. "And if not planned, then something that happens when a person believes they can do anything and still be forgiven. My father opened the screen door behind her and stepped out onto the porch. He looked tired but not broken, as if he had trained for a storm and weathered it the way he expected to. "Inside," he said, and the word had that tone again, directive dressed as invitation. I didn't move. "I want a lawyer," I said, still looking at my mother. "For me, not for you. And I want time." "You'll talk to the family first," my father said, and I turned to look at the man who taught me to bait a hook and to back up a trailer straight. "We do this in order." "Whose order?" I asked. He didn't answer. He only did that jaw thing, the small muscle in his cheek talking for him. My mother set the mug on the rail and reached for my hand. I stepped back. "I love you," she said again. "Whatever you think of me, know that I love you. Love is a word that can't fix a hinge once it's bent." I nodded and walked down the steps. Tessa's car door thunked closed behind me like punctuation. We left my parents on the porch, two people who had once been the doorway to the world and were now just people with a house. At Tessa's apartment, I showered until the water ran cool and then put on her softest sweatshirt. She set a mug of tea in front of me and a plate of toast, because Midwestern girls have two tools, and both are edible. When the worst of the shaking left my body, I opened the folder the planner had given me. The incident report was banal and excruciating. Time, location, parties separated, manager present, no injuries, no property damage, event continued with modifications. The door logs showed key card access to the kitchen hallway and the pantry, a line of times marching like ants. I stopped reading when the hallway suddenly felt too narrow in my memory. The invoices were what they were: flowers, music, linens, lighting, the mountain you climb when you decide to feed 200 people and call it love. Everything billed to my mother. Everything approved with her looping signature. A yellow sticky note on one page caught my eye. Per Tom's request, add pantry lock set to staff ring. I stared at that handwriting until the letters smeared. Tom, my father, had requested a separate lock for a door most couples never think about. It meant nothing. It meant everything. I tucked the page back into the folder like a secret I wasn't ready to know. By late afternoon, the calls began to feel less like help and more like a pile I couldn't climb. I let them go to voicemail. I made one of my own, to a lawyer a teacher friend recommended when her sister got divorced, a woman who sounded like she stored her compassion where she could reach it quickly. "Tomorrow," she said. "Bring what you have. Bring yourself." At dusk, I walked the 3 blocks to the park and sat on the swing I used to push students on at recess. 2 kids chased each other around the slide while their dad watched from a bench, nodding at his phone, and then at the sky as if both had something useful to say. My phone buzzed in my pocket. "Carter, I can explain. Please." I turned the screen down on my thigh and watched a rabbit vanish into the honeysuckle. When Tessa and I got back to the apartment, my father had texted a time for a family conversation. I didn't answer. He called. I let it ring. 5 minutes later he texted again. "We need to talk about next steps." The phrase was wrong for a day like this. It belonged in meetings where people traded budgets and timelines. My shoulders rose to my ears and stayed there. I slept on the couch, the way women do when beds feel too ceremonial. At 3 a.m., I woke to the kind of quiet that contains answers if you're brave enough to listen. The truth, that first truth, was straightforward. 2 people I loved had made a choice I couldn't bless on the one day I had asked them to be at their best. The second truth glowed like a coal I hadn't touched yet. It spelled itself in the planner's sticky note and in my father's voice when he said paperwork. I turned on my side and watched the red light on the coffee maker and tried to make my breathing match its patient blink. In the morning, I put on jeans, tied my hair back, and went to meet the lawyer. She had a plan in her window that looked cared for and a smile that didn't crowd me. I told her the story in order, and then out of order, and then in the right order again. When I ran out of words, she asked the questions people like her have to ask to make the world behave. Who holds which accounts? What name is the condo in? Do you share a car? Is there anything you need right now that you don't have yet? Answers, I said, half laughing, but the kind no one else can give me. Sometimes you do get them, she said. Sometimes the people who built the mess leave their tools where you can find them. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with an email from my father, forwarded from his account like a man who thinks a digital record is a favor. The subject line said, MOA, preliminary, and the first line I saw when I opened it read, per Section 10 of the prenuptial agreement, dissolution contingent on evidence of infidelity by wife. My hands went cold. I looked at the sender line, and then at the names in the CC. My father, his attorney, and this is where the room tilted again, a discreet corporate address that belonged to a private investigator's firm out of Cedar Rapids. My lawyer glanced up. Do you want to hand me the phone? She asked, like she was asking for a sharp knife pointed my way. I did. She read, and as she read, the world around me took on edges again. He wants grounds, she said softly, and he knows exactly which ones count. Grounds, I repeated, and the word felt like dirt and like claim stake for war. I'm sorry, she added, and meant it. The rest of the email was a list of tidy bullets, language from the prenup about fault, a note that photographic or sworn testimony sufficient, a line about expedited filing, a paragraph about asset distribution not to exceed $2 million cash as a settlement cap. My father had found the lever. He had only to pull it. I sat back. The room didn't spin, it hovered. He set it up, I said. I didn't know how yet. I just knew the shape of it. The pantry lock. The paperwork. The timing of everything. He needed her to fail, and he needed a witness. And your fiancé? The lawyer asked gently. He wanted the venue, I said, my mouth moving before my certainty arrived. He wanted the gloss. He wanted to be invited into my mother's world, and he decided the price was negotiable, saying it didn't make it bigger. It made it fit. I'll help you protect yourself, the lawyer said, from all of it. But I can't fix them. I don't want them fixed, I said. I want the truth to sit where it belongs. And that is how you move from the first door to the second, not with a crash, but with the click of an email and the sound of a woman deciding she doesn't owe anyone's silence anymore. The email lived in my inbox like a live wire. I must have opened it a dozen times that night, not because I doubted what it said, but because disbelief likes to rehearse itself. Each time my eyes landed on the phrases contingent on evidence of infidelity and $2 million cash settlement, my stomach clenched. $2 million. My father had turned my wedding into the down payment on his freedom. The pieces started snapping together in my head the way a cruel puzzle does. The upgraded venue I never asked for, my father's insistence on handling certain contracts himself, the lock on the pantry door. Even Carter's willingness to let my mother dictate the florals, and the wine list made more sense. He hadn't been compromising, he'd been cashing in. The hardest part wasn't imagining their meeting. My father and my fiancé in some dim bar, voices low, a handshake sealing my fate. The hardest part was realizing that my father's plan required me not to matter. I wasn't a daughter in this equation. I was the stage. The contract was the script. The betrayal was the cue. I didn't tell Tessa right away. She'd already done enough, fielded calls, made sure I ate, sat awake with me when silence felt like drowning. But eventually, the words spilled out. He planned it. Dad. With Carter. Her mouth opened and shut, like a child trying to count lightning strikes. You're sure? I've got the emails. I slid the phone across the counter. She read them, her knuckles blanching on the screen. He used me to trigger the prenup clause. He'll walk away with $2 million clean. Carter gets prestige for playing along. Mom loses everything. And me. I laughed, but it cracked. I lose all of them. Tessa pulled me into her arms and let me cry until my voice went hoarse. You still have me, she said fiercely. And you have yourself. Don't forget that. The next day, my mother called again. I let it go to voicemail. This time her message was ragged. Please, sweetheart, it wasn't what it looked like. Please come home. She didn't know yet, I realized. She thought it had been a reckless lapse, not a lever pulled. She was still playing checkers while Dad had been playing chess. By midweek, the town was buzzing. In the Midwest, gossip travels faster than fire. At the grocery store, people stared too long at the cereal aisle. A neighbor dropped off a casserole with an expression that tried to be neutral and failed. My principal pulled me aside in the hall and said, "Take as much time as you need." Even the students whispered. I wanted to tell them, you don't know the half of it. My lawyer kept me tethered to tasks. File this, copy that, gather financial records, so the grief wouldn't eat me whole. They're going to try to spin it, she warned. Your father is practical, your mother is reckless, Carter is naive. But you have the receipts, you have a timeline, and you have the voice. The voice. That was the part one kept clinging to. At my wedding, I'd already chosen not to stay silent. But this was different. This was the kind of truth that didn't just end a marriage or a party, it ended a family. One night, unable to sleep, I drove past my parents' house. The lights were on in the kitchen. Through the window, I saw my mother pacing, phone in hand, lips moving fast. My father sat at the table, reading a document with the calm of a man who had already won. I parked down the block and wept into my steering wheel. Not for Carter, not even for Mom. For the man who had taught me to ride a bike and fix a leaky faucet, who had carried me on his shoulders through county fairs, and who had still chosen money over me. The next Sunday, I asked Tessa to drive me back to the venue. We walked around the empty barn hall. The lavender had wilted, the chandeliers were dark. I stood where I'd given my short, broken speech. This is where my life split in two, I whispered. No, she corrected gently. This is where theirs ended. Yours is still beginning. But it didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like exile. I had no mother to call, no father to trust, no fiancé to build with. I had been used as a pawn and then discarded once my role was complete. As we left, I pulled the folded napkin from my clutch, the one where weeks ago I'd scribbled a vow to myself. I will not leave myself behind to be loved. I read it out loud, my voice catching, and tucked it back again. Because in the end, that was all I had left. My own promise, unbroken, the only thing in the wreckage that still belonged to me. The more I pieced the fragments together, the less it felt like betrayal, and the more it looked like theater. My father's calm in the aftermath, the lawyer's email, the sticky note about the lock, it all sang the same chorus. This had been arranged. Not the timing, not the raw shock of discovery, but the bones beneath it. I kept asking myself, how long had Carter known? Did he hesitate when he took my hand at the altar? Or had he already rehearsed the scene in the pantry, knowing exactly which door would swing open and when? The image of my mother haunted me more than Carter. Her hand to her throat, her eyes wide, her lips forming excuses no one would believe. She thought she had simply sinned. She didn't know she had been played. She was the lever, not the player. The prenup clause was the trap waiting all these years, and she had finally stepped right into it. One evening, I drove to the river and sat on the hood of my car. The water moved steady, indifferent, while my phone buzzed with new messages. One was from Carter, I never meant to hurt you. Please hear me out. Another from my father, it's complicated. You'll understand someday. And one from my mother, don't let him take everything from me. I wanted to scream at all of them. Instead, I stared at the current and whispered, You already took everything from me. The lawyer explained the prenup in plain words. If my mother was proven unfaithful, my father had full right to divorce with an immediate payout of $2 million. It was airtight, ironclad. And thanks to Carter, airtight had just become open air. The next week, the news spread beyond town. My mother's social circle in Chicago whispered about scandal. My father's friends at the hardware store avoided eye contact when he walked by. Carter's family issued a bland statement about personal matters. Meanwhile, I went to work, taught fractions and spelling, and returned to Tessa's couch each night with exhaustion sitting heavy on my shoulders. One night, as we folded laundry, Tessa asked the question I'd been circling around. Do you want to cut them all off? For good. I looked at the shirt in my lap, the one I'd worn the day Carter proposed. They cut me off first, I said. I was just the scenery for their deal. That week I boxed up the wedding photos, both printed proofs and digital files, and stored them in the attic of Tessa's building. I couldn't destroy them yet, but I couldn't live with them either. They were evidence of a play I had never agreed to audition for. On Friday, I met with the lawyer again. You're free of Carter legally, she said. It's annulment grounds, no contest. But the family side, that's yours to decide. Family side. The words felt ironic. My father had chosen money. My mother had chosen denial. Carter had chosen access. And me. I chose silence for now, because silence was the only thing that was still mine. That night, as the town buzzed with fresh gossip about settlement numbers, I sat alone and finally allowed myself to grieve. Not for Carter, not even for my parents, but for the family I thought I had. That family never really existed. It had been a stage set, painted bright for neighbors and friends. Behind it, the wood was already rotting. And once the curtain fell, there was nothing left standing at all. The final break came quietly. No slammed doors, no shouted confrontations. Just a letter. It arrived in a thick white envelope with my father's lawyer's letterhead. Inside, 3 pages, one confirming the divorce settlement, one affirming his financial claim, and one handwritten note in my father's careful script. I did what I had to do. Someday you'll see it was necessary. Necessary. That was the word he chose for shattering his marriage, for betraying his daughter, for turning my wedding into collateral. Necessary. I crumpled the note and threw it across the room. It didn't make me feel better. Nothing did. My mother called that same evening, her voice raw. He's leaving me. Do you understand what that means? He's taking everything. I understand, I said flatly. And you won't even speak to Carter? He wants to explain. I don't need an explanation, I said. I need a family. And I don't have one anymore. She sobbed. I didn't. I just hung up. That was the moment it hit me fully. I had lost them all. My mother to her choices, my father to his greed, my fiancé to his ambition. They weren't people I could lean on anymore. They were cautionary tales I would carry like stones. I moved into a small apartment near the school where I taught. I painted the walls myself, bought furniture secondhand, and planted lavender in pots on the windowsill. It wasn't the lavender of the wedding field, manicured and expensive. It was rougher, humbler. But it was mine. People kept asking if I was okay. The answer was complicated. No, I wasn't okay. I had been betrayed in ways that rearranged my blood. But yes, I was surviving. And survival, at that moment, felt like a form of triumph. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear my father's voice at the microphone. I found them. Sometimes I see Carter's pocketed hands, my mother's practiced gasp. Those memories don't fade easily. But alongside them, another memory has begun to grow. Me, standing before 200 people, refusing to play along. Me, walking out with my head high. In the end, the money didn't matter. The contract didn't matter. The gossip didn't matter. What mattered was that I kept the one vow no one else could touch. I did not abandon myself. And so my wedding day became my reckoning day. The day I lost my parents, my groom, my illusion of family. The day I was stripped bare and left with nothing but my own name. It was enough. It had to be. Because sometimes the only way to begin is to lose everything first.